the question to both of you, I guess, is has your thinking changed, or maybe it hasn't, about the significance of the fact that you won civil unions instead of marriage?
We're going to jump in on that? Go for it, Beth. I promise I'll let Mary jump in. I'm not sure my thinking's changed because I'm not entirely sure what it was. When the civil union bill passed, a lot of people talk about the Baker case as the civil union case, which always sort of, makes me shudder because it wasn't actually a civil union case, it was a marriage case. And we didn't win, but we didn't lose. We came up with this sort of middle ground decision that really left it to the legislature, and then what we ended up with in the legislature was civil unions. And I think even the decision about whether or not to support civil unions in the end was very challenging for us. It would not have passed without our support. It wasn't a situation where we could say no, nothing but marriage will suffice, but then it will pass anyway. So once marriage was off the table, we had to make a decision about whether to get behind that bill or not. And I can say that for our entire community, it was a wrenching and difficult decision, and involved a lot of debate and backs and forths, and I think we ultimately came to consensus that it was a step. And at the time, it was actually the most comprehensive set of legal protections for same-sex couples anywhere in the country, and it rivaled same-sex protections anywhere in the world. And so it was nothing to snuff at, but it certainly wasn't what we set out for. When the bill passed, I was personally obviously happy about the advance, but the fear that I had, and that many of us had, was that we had introduced and to some extent legitimated this concept of a separate track for same-sex couples. And if the civil union law proved to be a stepping stone to eliminating that separate track, we'd feel good about what we'd done. If the civil union law became sort of a ceiling instead of a floor, if it became sort of the new path that we found ourselves shunted down on a national basis, I think we would have felt really bad about our contribution to the broader movement. And I will say that during the first few years after the bill passed, it seemed like we were on that latter path. And it's really only been this year when New Hampshire, Connecticut, both by court decision and legislatively, and I'm sure hoping before it's all done that we'll see New Jersey move from civil unions to marriage, and then I'll feel confident that it really was a stepping stone rather than a ceiling.
I just wanted to add a few things about context in Vermont too, because Beth has given you really powerful reasons about why it made sense to file in Vermont at the time that we filed in Vermont. And that groundwork was critical. And at the same time, there were some other forces operating. So we talked about why and acknowledged quite rightly its importance in opening the door. I mean, I think a lot of us, when the Hawaii Supreme Court ruled in May of 1993 that a marriage case by 3 couples should not have been dismissed because it looked like discrimination that the state should justify, it was a jaw-dropping kind of experience, like, whoa, the court got that. We didn't think that was going to come down the pike for years and years. So with that door opening, there was a lot resting on Hawaii, and things seemed to be proceeding well, except that eventually they weren't proceeding well. And my perspective is the national right wing moved in and got people pretty agitated, and the next thing we knew, there was a bad statute, and then an authorization for a constitutional amendment election. And that context was important too, because Beth and Susan and others have done so much work in Vermont, and we're doing so much work in Vermont, saying, we're a pretty good state too. We have a great constitution and all these other great things. And it was looking like Hawaii was in tough shape. And it really did make sense not to put all of one's eggs in any one state, and to really think about bringing the freedom to marry issue to the mainland, which is what we did when we filed that case in July of 1997. It's very much about Vermont, but I also think there was a bigger context out there as well that it made sense to say, yes, we should take another risk here. We can't just let this opening close on us. So that's just one thing I want to say about that. And then, I think Beth is really right. I mean, I will just say this about Beth. I remember being in a meeting what happened after the court decision on December 20th, 1999, when we were all surprised. We planned for a lot of things, but not that, okay? We were ready, we thought, for anything except what actually happened. So the legislature was due to convene on January 4th, 2000. So Beth, in her incredibly amazing, and Susan, in their efficient ways, hired like excellent lobbyists and had them fully briefed, ready to hit the ground on January 4th. Because what was happening was that the House Judiciary Committee, chaired by a Republican named Tom Little, was going to actually take the lead in figuring out what should be the legislature's response to the Baker decision. And the first question was really, which way do we go? Do we go with marriage, since that was an option, or do we go with a separate system? And many, many people, again, really led by Beth and Susan, worked tirelessly to persuade them that equal means equal and something separate is a problem. But then, of course, they voted ultimately, I think it was in February or something, and said, we're going to go with a separate system and try to make that work. And it was hard. It was really hard. And I remember that's when I remember being at this meeting in Montpelier with Beth and Susan and other people who had been working very, very hard on this issue, really talking about what do we do now. And it was a real crossroads because no bill would have passed without the support of these folks. So the question was, really hanging in the air, do we just kill this off because we don't want something that's different and unequal, or do we try to make this work and really push it to the max? And guess what, it got pushed to the max. And I personally now, looking back on it, believe that it was a crucial bridge to the future. You know, at that time, and I know it's hard to imagine now, but maybe some of you remember this. I mean, I remember I'm trying to remember this individual's name who talked about how Vermont was going to be swallowed up in a pit of fire. Remember that person? Okay, anyway, so Beth's looking away like PTSD. So I think it was really important to show that same-sex couples could be folded into a marital system, because as you recall, what Vermont pioneered here was a system that is a marital status, and it's supposed to be parallel at the state level to marriage. And it was a really crucial bridge for people to bring the temperature down and to see that something could work. Now, of course, once it was there and people felt really good about it, the dangers began in terms of people becoming very satisfied with having a separate system for a minority group. And of course, that's been part of the struggle since then. But I really want to say that it was, from my perspective, looking back on it, I'm just so grateful that the people who were there to do the right things at the time they